Welcome to Debunking Ukrainian Nationalism. This is a series that will study and debunk the myths of Ukrainian nationalist propaganda that are all around us today. So by now, I'm sure you're wondering, why haven't we addressed the elephant in the room? Holodomor. The events that have now been coined as Holodomor are extremely controversial and quite contested by historians. But it is clear that Ukrainian nationalists and Western governments have chosen their position. Holodomor is a Soviet-initiated genocide. Today, 17 countries around the world recognize Holodomor as a genocide. So first, let's talk about what a genocide is. According to the United Nations, the international legal definition of a genocide is any acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. So the hegemonic narrative is that Ukrainians were targeted by the Soviet government to erase the Ukrainian people through starvation, purges, and executions. Now, we will not deny that there was a famine in Ukraine in the early 30s, but what is to be examined is whether or not the economic policies that were implemented were set out to starve Ukrainian people. But before we can dive into that, let's talk about the rise of the Holodomor campaign. Prior to 1970, Holodomor was hardly spoken of in the West or even in Ukraine. In fact, it wasn't until the late 1980s that the term Holodomor was used to describe the famine. So what happened? Well, Ukrainian nationalists in North America were beginning to become infuriated as they felt that the Ukrainian identity was starting to develop this stereotype of Nazi collaborator. The 70s and the 80s saw a wave of media showcasing Ukrainian nationalists' role in the Holocaust. For instance, in 1977, Ukrainian-American John Demjanjuk was arrested and later convicted in Israel for allegedly having worked in a death camp. In 1975, Lucy Davidovich's The War Against the Jew was later released, which revealed how Ukrainian nationalists partook in the genocide against Jews. And then in 1978, the miniseries Holocaust aired, which also accurately depicted Ukrainian nationalists' role in the Holocaust. Well, Ukrainian North Americans did not want the crimes of their parents revealed, so in 1982, they launched the campaign to formally recognize the Ukrainian Holocaust, casting it as a deliberate genocide perpetuated by the Soviet government. Initially, they claimed that 7 million Ukrainians were deliberately starved out by Stalin. Remember when I said that the nationalists largely came from the Ukrainian intelligentsia? Well, in 1983, Ukrainian-Canadian veterans of the Waffen-SS Galicia Division campaigned and even published scholarly articles on Holodomor. Some veterans served on the board of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, and another served as the chancellor of the university at Alberta. Even Stepan Bandera's son, Andrei Bandera, bumped the number of victims up from 7 million to 15 million in the OUNB published book Hominy Ukraine. That Holodomor as a genocide was a campaign launched in North America and exported around the world. Its notoriety in the West and in Ukraine is literally rooted in Holocaust apologies. Now just like and watch the next part so we can dive into what really happened during the events known as Holodomor.